Good evening and good morning to one and all present here. Wishing you a very happy new year. I, Afreen Kalaso, am the Assistant Director for University Engagement and Partnership at LSAC Global. It is my honor to welcome you all to the second webinar series and the first of 2021 on legal careers, the Indian corporate lawyer, organized by LSAC Global and under the Discover Law campaign. We would be hosting a series of these new discussions every month, focusing on new initiatives and discoveries in the legal sector. The webinar will be featuring Indian and international leaders to highlight the academic and professional opportunities for students in the field of law. The theme would be focused on professional, academic, international, and jurisprudential aspects of law. On behalf of LSAC and LSAC Global Leadership Team, I would like to thank all the panelists and our audience for the continued support and enthusiasm towards improving access to legal education and increasing diversity of the legal profession. On that note, I would like to share the background for today's theme. We have seen a sudden surge in the number of students who are interested in pursuing career in law, and we place a great value in working, and they place a great value working in corporate law firms. The aim of this webinar is to help parents and students to understand the different career opportunities a corporate law firm in India or abroad offers or caters to. We also aim to provide clarity on how a law aspirant can say seek internships and fellowships at law firms. Today on our panel, we have Professor Vikramaditya Khanna. Professor Vikramaditya Khanna is a William W. Cook Professor of Law at Michigan Law School. Additionally, he's also on the Academic Advisory Board for Sai University. He earned his SJD at Harvard Law School and was the Bruce W. Nicholas Visiting Professor of Law in fall 2013 at Harvard Law School. His area of interest include corporate security laws, law and legal issues in India, corporate and white-collar crimes, legal profession and professional responsibility, corporate governance in emerging markets, and law and economics. Thank you, sir, for joining us today and kicking off the year by joining us on this webinar. We're also extremely honored to have with us Dr. Anant Padmanabhan. Dr. Anant currently serves as the Dean, Academic Affairs at Sai University and is one of the chief architects for Daksha Fellowship. His research interests are in the field of technology policy, intellectual property rights, and innovation scholarships. Dr. Anant holds a master's and a doctoral degree from University of Pennsylvania Law School, and he also completed his undergrad in law from NSIU, Bangalore. He practiced law for 6 years before the Honorable Madras High Court before embarking his journey for higher studies. So we look forward to your views on the future of Indian corporate lawyer. We're also delighted to have amongst us Mr. Abhishek Dubey. Abhishek is a transnational lawyer is a transactional lawyer and has more than 12 years of experience in advising on M&A, private equity, and general corporate matters. He is also the principal associate with one of India's largest and most reputed law firms, Shardul Amarchand Mangaldas. In 2018, he won the coveted corporate law scholarship from the International Bar Association. Abhishek is someone who's taken keen interest in conducting seminar courses and lectures for various law schools in India, and he's also mentored law schools and interns in their professional journey. Abhishek, we really look forward to hearing your views on this burning topic today. Last but not the least, we have on our panel a newly fresh graduate from Alliance School of Law, Alliance University, Mr. Saumil Nigam. Saumil completed his BBA LLB honors in 2019 and thereafter joined the Federal Bank Limited as the legal officer. In his current role, he is entrusted with a number of responsibilities, the first and foremost of which is making the law simpler for other officers at the field level to ensure smooth functioning of the banking business. His other responsibilities include drafting, venting of legal, loan documents, monitoring suits filed by and against the bank before various courts, and rendering opinion on several other legal aspects or matters pertaining to corporate licensing. Thank you again for your time today. Let's start with a brief opening comment from each of you about advice you want to give to law aspirants who are presently on the webinar today, listening to us keenly on this topic, that why is today a good time to join a law school, and what are the emerging trends that you like to highlight. So, Professor Vikramaditya Khanna, would you like to go first?
Sure. Thank you, Afreen, and thank you for LAC Global to invite us all here today. And I'm delighted to see our co-panelists and everyone who's in the audience. So I think this is an amazing time actually to be entering the legal profession for a lot of reasons. One, of course, is that as you know, prior to the COVID pandemic starting, there was already an increase in interest in the corporate law side. That's partially because as companies and countries were more open to globalization, we saw more and more interaction with different legal regimes in the business space, creating more demand for people who are working in the corporate law side. During the pandemic, the law profession has actually held up quite well. There have been very limited layoffs, and indeed, there are already large increases in enrollment when we're looking at US law schools and UK law schools for more people entering the legal profession. I think part of that reflects the growth they anticipate occurring in the corporate side, whether it's on the mergers and acquisitions side, whether it's on the bankruptcy side, or sadly, if it's on the white collar crime side. So that when you're looking at many of the key stalwarts of growth in the corporate law sector, all of them are experiencing growth and all are anticipated to experience growth in the next few years. Combine that with some of the novel issues that will likely face corporate lawyers post the pandemic, or even during the tail ends of the pandemic, we would anticipate there to be quite a lot of both intellectual and practical interest in the corporate law side.
Thank you, Professor. I think that gives us a good note to start on, especially like you said that there were very few layoffs. Dr. Anand, what would be your opinion on this? That why should students take up law as a career at this point of time?
Thanks, Afreen, for making this entire session happen. And let me begin by thanking LSAC Global. This is a great opportunity to interact with senior professors like Dr. Khanna and practitioners like Abhishek and Saumil. Uh, I think where I'm seeing a lot of potential, especially during the pandemic, but even before that, is the reliance on technology, right? And what that means for lawyers. I think, let me just begin by sharing a very reassuring anecdote, especially because there is a lot of anxiety that I have seen among our students at the Daksha Fellowship, what's going to happen and so on and so forth. And in fact, I was just having a very casual catch-up conversation with one of our visiting faculty who's also partner at a leading tier one law firm working on technology, media, and telecom. And what he said was very reassuring. He said by October, I had actually met the annual targets. So for the next 3 months, if I actually sat and did nothing for the next 2 months, really nobody would really pressurize me to do more because we had already done enough. And that's because the rise of the digital was felt in an extremely pronounced manner on account of pandemic, unfortunately, but I think also on account of the fact that there is this transition that has been in the making for a fairly long time. In fact, one of the things that he mentioned, which struck me as particularly interesting, is that he said it's not really your big tech. The big tech guys were always our clients, and we were doing a lot of work for the Amazons and the Facebooks. He said Indian Railways, for instance, has reached out. The Highways Authority of India. So there's a lot of technology transition happening in many sectors, particularly in government. And he was of the view that there is so much happening in these areas. And now, as an educator, where I can weigh in is to say that while these transitions are happening in the world of business, in the world of regulation, there is very little transition happening in the legal education space, right? And that's why I think this is the right moment for law students to take up, a career in law or to pursue, legal education, because I think there is a transition in parallel which is going to happen, is already happening in some of the law schools. New kinds of courses. There's a lot of experimentation, and we can speak a little more about it as the conversation unfolds. So I think it's an exciting time really to be a lawyer, and the technology advance is one factor that I would really like to bring into the matrix and say that is influencing a lot of where the legal sector, services sector is headed, generating a lot of work.
Thank you, Dr. Anand. I think that really helps a student to analyze and understand why this would be the right time, especially with technology disruptions happening in this field. That takes me to Abhishek, because you are somebody who's been practicing in this field for so long. How do you think that has impacted you in terms of your practice, and what has changed in that course?
Yeah, first of all, thank you, LSAC Global, for having me for this webinar. Thanks a lot for that. So what I think, not just about COVID, but in the last decade, the way the whole paradigm has changed for law is transformational. The reason is that in the last decade, the idea of just good students going for science stream has been dispelled. And in this last decade, a lot of students who are really interested in law, they have taken up law, and a lot of audience right now would also be basically looking forward to joining law, not just because they are not good at science. For example, one example is sitting before you. A lot of people in the last decade, that is from 1995 to maybe around 2008, 2010, we figured that, okay, we are not good at science, but where to go, right? And we ended up in law, and we are still holding fort somehow. But in the last decade, that has changed. So, and which is very good for the practice of law in India. So that is one. And secondly, if you see the changes that happened just after the great financial crisis of 2008, 2009, there were several startups that were launched to solve the problems that arose then. And those startups are unicorns now, which means that they are worth more than $1 billion in India. These are Indian unicorns. One such example is Zerodha, which basically is a stockbroking firm, and it is valued, it was bootstrapped. They have not taken any funding so far, right? So I expect that similarly there are already several startups who are going to basically launch themselves. And how it interplays with the legal profession is that it makes the legal profession more egalitarian. Audience would know that if you're trying to decide whether one of the deciding factors is, are you coming from a legal background? Do you have anyone to back you up if you do not get clients after law? What after 5 years of law, right? But the whole startup landscape has really made the legal profession more egalitarian, because people, great minds of your and my age, have actually launched startups. They are working with us, and that way I feel that legal profession is no more just for people who had a family backing, but for everyone.
Thank you, Abhishek. I think that gives us a good overview, and especially for students who think that they need to study a particular subject to pursue law. I think it's such a diverse and a dynamic career that you really don't have to think of pursuing law and think of having some additional subjects to it. You could be great in one area of interest and then go ahead and take up that as your own and make it your own. That brings me to Saumil, because Saumil, you've been in this particular field as a very young professional. What do you think in terms of the difference you've seen during your internships, and now that probably the work from home style of things have taken over? Have you seen some sort of a difference in that style, and what are the things a student should keep in mind if such a situation happens again?
First of all, I would like to thank LSAC Global for providing me an opportunity to share my experience with the young minds. And my other co-panelists, they have already spoken about the transition and the technological part of it. So as we all know that legal profession is always considered as one of the most noble profession, as it is the duty of the lawyers to uphold and protect the law. And then secondly, there was a societal trend, which Abhishek sir also pointed out, that we were encouraged to join engineering or medical. And usually the parents did not favor law as a career. But now things have changed immensely, and plus there was a traditional practice that litigation, you have to join some big lawyer you have to join the office of a big lawyer. You have to practice litigation for 3-4 years there, and they will make you work like a machine, and then they will pay you some 12,000 rupees, and then you have to establish your own practice before a court of law. But those things have changed, especially in the last 5-6 years. And there are companies, there are MNCs who are hiring the in-house counsels. There are banks who are hiring the legal officers, because previously they do not had an internal team who were dealing with the legal aspects. But now things have changed, and the companies are coming up with their internal legal department. They are also arguing before the court of law, and so on. So things have really changed in the last 5-6 years, and the opportunities have increased either in the corporate sector as well.
Thank you, Saumil, for that. So that actually brings me to the next question, and this is directed to Professor Vikramaditya Khanna. Professor, what do you think is the impact of globalization on legal education now, and especially in the profession here in India? Do you think this COVID-19 has some sort of a lasting imprint on law firms in India and around the world?
Thank you. I do think so. Maybe I'll start with the first part of your question regarding globalization. I think over the last 20 years, the growth of globalization has enabled more and more business to transact across borders, which basically means that companies are more interested in markets outside of their own, which means they have to be familiar with legal rules outside of their own. So a company that's doing business in, say, India and the US needs to be familiar with both sets of laws, Indian laws and US laws. And on top of that, all the international laws and obligations that may attach to their transactions. That by itself will cause a growth in demand for corporate legal services. But then as you also increase globalization, you also increase knowledge transfer and communication across groups of people. And that will also enhance what one thinks about the law and where one sees the legal profession growing. So for example, when we did some research related to the legal profession in India, and if we look back about 25 years, there may not have been more than 2,000 or 3,000 corporate lawyers in all of India. Now estimates are close to around 16 to 18,000. Just to give you a sense of how that compares to the US, in the US there's something like 450,000 corporate law attorneys. That basically suggests that the scope for growth in India is large. And we have been seeing that over the last decade or so, as Abhishek mentioned, in the growth of the number of positions and also the salaries for corporate lawyers increasing dramatically, whether that's at law firms or also in-house departments, which have grown dramatically both in the US and elsewhere. I think one of the big things coming out of COVID that I've noticed is one that attorneys have managed to still keep very busy. Virtually everybody I know who's working in a law firm claims to be working longer hours, which is remarkable. The other thing I've noticed, and this is consistent with what Dr. Padmanabhan was saying, is the increasing use of technology in the provision of legal services, as well as in the role of corporate lawyers. So I think both of those are fueling increasing demand for corporate law talent and corporate law positions.
Thank you, Professor. I think that also brings me to the second question, which is directed to Dr. Anant, because I feel that there are so many law schools here in India, and you have just introduced this Daksha Fellowship, which is India's first law, policy, and business fellowship program for young and mid-career lawyers. So how do you think Daksha Fellowship would help shape the future lawyer in corporate practice, specifically in India? And can you tell us something more about the fellowship?
I think I'll just take a quick step back to look at the fellowship model itself, because it's kind of not very known to the legal education sector in India, at least. And I suspect not even that popular globally. So when we designed the whole fellowship, the idea was that, like the medical fellowship, there are certain areas where specialized legal education needs to be given emphasis. And at the same time, like some of the other fellowships that we've seen succeed quite well in the Indian context, the Young India Fellowship, for instance, at Ashoka, there are also certain soft skills that can be improved, that we can give lawyers a platform to sort of get better at that. So there are these two different motivations in some sense, which led to designing the Daksha Fellowship. And coming from the first part of this motivation is the whole pathway structure at Daksha, where we have two different pathways. there is a technology law and policy pathway, and there is a disputes and regulatory practice pathway. And the idea is simple, that the technology transition needs a lot of emphasis on new areas, like for instance data protection, right? And in fact, I was speaking to our faculty who's teaching data protection. Most of our faculty for these courses are either policy practitioners or law firm practitioners, right? And she was in fact saying that I think yours is probably the first program in the country to have a full course on data protection. And it's only at that point that it struck me that that's probably accurate, right? And similarly, courses around cyber crimes and cyber security, the IT Act, right? So there are all these cluster of courses required for any good technology lawyer to excel in the work that she does, right? And that's one aspect. And the other is the rise of the regulatory state. So we all spoke about corporate law, right? And at some level, the lens from which we look at corporate law has changed in the last decade or 2 decades, from a common law lens to a more regulatory lens, whether it's securities law, whether it's bankruptcy and insolvency, takeover court. So how do you sort of really weave in this larger story about the regulatory state into our thinking about legal education, right? And how do we sort of train students in understanding what these regulatory institutions are doing, and they're doing a host of different things, right? Because your classic separation of powers, so to say, does not apply here. I mean, they make rules, they adjudicate, they also finally decide what penalties you have to pay. So, and there's a lot of policy making too that happens in these within the portals of these institutions. So we really felt that we need to design courses which give you both a conceptual understanding of regulation as well as sectorally sort of deep diving into areas like energy and sustainability, the corporate and financial cluster that we now have, right? And similarly on disputes, again, there is a lot of transition, particularly on account of the commercial courts division being created. And in addition to that, the rise of mediation, arbitration, which is, I don't claim that these are absolutely new phenomenon. They have been in the works for a while, but I think the rapidity with which it's sort of now happening, right? And it's completely changing the landscape. In fact, in addition to the fact that there are new opportunities in law firms and corporates, I would actually like to emphasize that there's a huge explosion of corporate commercial litigation, which is both regulatory as well as private law disputes and arbitration cases again. And for instance, I was talking to a Chennai lawyer who's an arbitration expert, and he was telling me, now I'm known as an arbitration expert across the country and no longer a Delhi lawyer or a Chennai lawyer, because it's all done online, right? Thanks to the pandemic. So I think there is huge, transitions happening, and we needed a learning model that can give you these specializations, and that's one part of the motivation. The other is, the soft skills part, which I can take up at a later stage during this conversation as well. But the short point is that we felt that there is need to give more critical thinking skills, more communication skills, and bar council and all these regulatory bodies and senior lawyers, judges, they all keep talking about these things, right? That, look, we are not getting the kind of skill set that we need from young lawyers, and we felt that we can provide that too while running the fellowship. So that's how the fellowship model really came about, and these are the sort of gaps that we are in many ways trying to address.
Yes, and Dr. Anand, I think that's absolutely right in the sense that, we keep on talking about this T-shaped lawyer model, but somehow I feel that certain law firms have really not adopted it in the right way or don't understand the exact nuances the T-shaped lawyer should have. So that actually brings me to Abhishek here, because I would want to know from you that why should an in-house lawyer develop these non-traditional skills as mentioned as a T-shaped lawyer? Why do you think that interpersonal skills or some project management skills are important at this day and age to enhance your work when you're working at a law firm?
Right. So that's a great question, actually, and it is generally relevant, generally also for life. So basically, let's first understand what is a T-shaped lawyer. So a T-shaped lawyer would mean that who is excellent in his core competency, which is basically advocacy, And then he has the ability to read the subtext of the law or a new regulation, or he has the empathy to understand what his team members require and take the best out of him or her. So let's take an example. A simple example would be Dhoni. His key competency was not batting. His key competency was captainship. He was not as good as in batting as he was in keeping wickets, or he was in captaincy. And his other competency, or the generalized competency, was the intuition he had to take the best out of the players he had. And he had given a super over to a fairly new bowler, and the last over to a very new debutant, and still won the World Cup, right, in 2007. So that is the T-shaped model that we talk about, and it is also required in any profession, like including law, because you need to have your core competency so that you can give the best services to the client, be a trusted advisor to the client, and at the same time understand the need of the client and your team, so that after a point you will have a team and you have to work in collaboration with others. There are several books written on human collaboration. So even though I understand that there is COVID and everybody is working online, but I'm very bullish also on human collaboration. And I think that everything, when post vaccine, people will again come together and work in a collaborative fashion, and not just online. Maybe some professions like technology, IT industry can be online, but others, human beings, will have to come along and basically create something new for the world. So that, I believe, a T-shaped lawyer proposition is very important in today's date, so that you are not just excellent in your core competency and domain, but also you have the intuition, you have the empathy to understand the needs of the people around you and get the best out of them.
Thank you, Abhishek, for that. And that actually, I feel I want to diverge a little bit from this particular topic and understand from Saumil now that how has his journey been, because today as part of our audience members, most of them are young students who are studying in 11th and 12th grade. They would want to know your journey from law school to the legal officer, so that they feel aspire to kind of choose that kind of a career path. So especially you being from Alliance University, how has that the law school helped you shape what you are today?
I would begin with a small story here. So way back when we were in our school, so we had a career counseling session when we were in the 11th standard. So there was a career counseling session which was scheduled for us. So the faculty there, he was explaining about the various career prospects in the profession of law and how to choose one. So he made a quote. He quoted Lord Radcliffe there, and he said that we cannot learn law only by learning the law, and it is much more than that. It also deals with economics, it deals with political science, sociology, and it is also a part of ethics, philosophy of life, and law covers all these things, and it is only not a black letter. So, and then I came back to my home, I discussed it with my parents, and then research about the various career prospects and future aspects. And then that was the time when my interest towards law developed. So then I joined Alliance in 2014. And I just want to add one thing here, that law students or aspirants, they should not get demotivated or disheartened if they are not able to get into a NLU, because experience or practical exposure is much more important, especially in the profession of law, because that will last forever and will help you in the career development as well. So my journey in Alliance was a very pleasant experience, and I made sure that throughout my 5 years of the law school, I took part in several competitions, especially the moot court competitions, because taking part in moot court competitions help a law student in gaining in-depth knowledge of legal research. And it also gives you an experience of art of persuasion, which is very important in the field of law. And then secondly, I planned my internships in such a way that it helped me to secure a job in federal bank as a legal officer. And then the law aspirants or students, they should plan the internship in such a way that they gain maximum practical exposure and experience out of that, which we may discuss in the further course of time also.
Thank you, Somil. I think that really brings and puts a little bit of clarity, because some of the students did write to us to ask whether, it's better to join an NLU versus a private institute. I think bottom line is that you can be part of any law school, but you have to mark your journey or embark your journey in such a way that you have some sort of practical exposure. And that also brings me to Professor Vikramaditya here, that what do you think is the role of a law school in shaping some internship opportunities or fellowship opportunities? What are the different aspects in terms of their contribution to a student who is currently, say, studying at a law school?
Thank you. I think a law school can play a very central role in encouraging the development of internships and helping to match students with those sorts of internships. Here in the United States, law schools have very large career placement departments that spend a substantial amount of their time basically trying to set up internships and networking with law firms and with in-house departments and government to arrange for those kinds of experiences that would allow students to get the kind of practical experience that many of you have mentioned, but also to have students have the opportunity to interact with others who have sort of become more senior in the profession, to learn what it's like and what sorts of things are important for the particular path they are choosing for their legal career. Or even if that's the path they wish to choose. If you decide to go at a law firm, you may in the end decide you wish to work in the government or vice versa. So I think law schools have a pivotal role to play in this. Indian law schools, I think, are beginning to have more of a role in this, but I think as the profession gets more and more professionalized and as it grows, I think the law schools become a central focal point for beginning to think about internships and for casting the net broadly to not just look at one particular type of arrangement, but for many different kinds of arrangements, whether it is an internship during your break time or whether it is actually even giving you course credit for doing something while you're in law school. So for example, here, every now and then we will approve a student spending a semester at a government agency and count that as part of their law school credit. Not too long ago, we had a few students do that at the OECD, dealing with anti-money laundering, which has of course become quite a big area over the last so many years.
Thank you, Professor. Yes, law school definitely plays an important role, but it's also important that how a law student places their internships, during their whole course, whether it's a 3-year course or a 5-year course. And, that's what I would like to ask Abhishek, that, you've been somebody who's mentored students and interns regularly. So what should a current law aspirant or a student look out for while they're, say, applying for these internships and placements?
Yeah, so basically, when you're applying for internships, basically the larger question what everyone faces, and I can see in the Q&A section also, that how to figure out and when to figure out whether it's corporate law for me or it is litigation for me. And that is the elephant in the room that one has to address. But frankly, nobody has an answer to that. So for students who basically try to find out what suits best for them, I think they already have an answer somewhere inside them. So they have to scratch it a little and they'll get that answer. And in the law school, you will get 5 years to basically figure it out. If you cannot figure it out in 5 years, it is still okay. Then you have the option to choose. After that, the profession will choose you. So you will end up either in litigation or in corporate or several other areas that Professor Vic just explained, and which have emerged over the last few years in India as well. For example, white collar arbitration and anti-money laundering. These. But my main focus or my main advice to students would be to basically develop their core competency and their domain knowledge in these 5 years as much as they can, because law is very accessible in the sense that all the wisdom uh, is there available free of cost through the judgments of the Supreme Court and the High Court. These are eminent jurists who write these judgments, and the representations made by the top councils all across India are also basically recorded in each and every judgment. So, if you want to figure out what you want to do, you can read the judgments and then, understand what makes you exciting, or what excites you more, whether it is arbitration or it is a knowledge of the contract, whether that carbolic smoke ball company case from the contracts is what you want to, what excites you, and you want to figure out what other areas of contract can come up in future in the technology world. So my advice is that basically in these 5 years, you can focus on developing your domain knowledge. Then you have to figure out through internships, if you can, whether you want to go for litigation or for corporate. When you finally figure out, or the profession chooses you, as I just explained, after 5 years, then, so there is a beautiful book by Malcolm Gladwell. He writes in his book, Outliers, he says that, not everybody is talented, and most people who have achieved great heights have done so by the 10,000 hour rule, which is basically nothing but if you do a certain thing for 10,000 hours in your life, which maybe, could be 8 to 10 years in lawyer's life, you will excel at it. All right. So if you end up with corporate law, it is still law. It is still advocacy. It is some way different from litigation or dispute resolution, but ultimately there is a generalized area of law which you will be expert of, right? So, therefore, you should not worry about, whether litigation or corporate. You should go with what your heart says. 10,000 hour rule will not fail you, and just march ahead.
Thank you, Abhishek, for that. And you're right that there are times that some students cannot figure out where exactly they fit during their 5-year law school journey. And this brings me to Daksha Fellowship, which has actually made it a mandatory rule for having an 8-week internship with law firms or corporate organization and think tanks. So Dr. Anand, why do you think this sort of step was important? And, do you believe that this is the kind of a blended legal education which is required at this time and age?
So I mean, I would in fact say that if I had full freedom, we would have probably double the time. The capstone program is actually a very successful model in many programs. Actually, interestingly, the LLM programs don't usually have too much emphasis given to this model. But when I was speaking to friends in Cambridge who do the public policy program, the capstone is a very interesting model by which they end up working with organizations on very specific problems with a certain amount of time which you can invest in that problem, right? So your learning gets really amplified. Of course, the way we think about it, and that's why that 8-week period is also structured after the second term, is that you have a lot of the generalist understanding that we want to provide in the very beginning of the program, such as public policy, finance, accounting, and you have one term of your pathway courses. So if you're doing the tech law and policy pathway, you would have done a course on data protection, on telecom, on the IT Act, right? And then there are some courses which we park for later, but at least with that foundational knowledge, you go in and work for about 2 months with a law firm or a think tank. Your ability to understand the nature of the problems that they face on a regular basis is amplified, and what you take from that internship is also amplified. Of course, this is our first year, and we are really also thinking of ways in which we can structure the internship and not just make it one other internship, right? So that they can really work with internship partners who are also in some sense accountable, right? Who not only get the benefit of our fellows going there, but our fellows too get in reverse the benefit, right? And they are in some sense accountable, give them more work, make it clear that, look, this is the progress of the student, at least have a mid internship review. So I think a lot of it is also structuring. But the broader idea is that, if you really want to bridge this gap that exists between the world of work and the world of learning, I think, working with organizations that see a steady flow of these challenges at a practical level needs to, happen. And that's what we are really trying to do with the internship program.
Thank you, Dr. Anand, for that. And that also brings me to Somil now, because Somil, there are a lot of questions by the audience as well. They want to understand what a typical day looks like in a law firm, and what kind of cases. Especially, I know you're dealing with the banking sector, but are you really restricted to say one niche area, or you could be looking at other areas where it could be specifically to some sort of a corporate arrangement or drafting? So how do you help the audience understand, say, the difference between a corporate lawyer or in-house counsel or a law officer like you?
So the basic difference between these terms is that when you are working in a law firm, you are basically known as a corporate lawyer. But while you are working in a MNC or in a legal cell of a company, then they are known as the in-house counsel. And while few of the banks and public sector undertakings, they generally call the officers working in the legal cell as law or legal officers. So it is beyond doubt that comprehensive knowledge of law is required in all the said roles. But as per my opinion and as per my little experience, while you are working as an in-house counsel or while you are working in a law firm or as a legal officer in a bank, you will end up doing into different kinds of work which pertains to different areas of law. As you said, it is not particular to a specific area, and maybe today you are negotiating a contract, and then tomorrow you may be drafting a new loan document or a new contract which has to be signed with the clients, and then day after maybe you are managing a litigation before the court of law which has a different subject matter altogether. Say there is a property dispute, you are handling that, and then you may be drafting a policy and that you have to place it before the board of directors doing a due diligence. So it totally does not depend only on a particular area of law, and it is very vast. And plus it is also not only confined to law. When you are inside the business, you may have to deal with the managerial aspects as well, and it is not only confined to the law, because you are inside the business, you are into the business. And while working in a law firm, I think Abhishek sir would better answer it. But then while you are working in a law firm, you gain in-depth knowledge of the specific areas, say capital markets, M&A, in which you are working, and you tend to build upon expertise in that particular area. And in addition, just one thing, as an in-house, you do not have to deal with clients per se. And but whereas while working in a law firm, you may have to deal with many clients in a single day, which gives a different kind of exposure altogether.
That's right, Somil. Thanks for that. And actually, I would ask Abhishek to address this question as well. People want to know what is the work culture in a law firm. They really associate the same with the popular series of Suits. Do you think that there are long hours? How does one tackle that? And what are those one or two things you wish you knew before entering, say, a law firm?
Yeah, so first to answer or basically, explain to the audience what a corporate lawyer really does, and how is it different from litigation, and what basically happens in a law firm. So it is basically, preparation. So for example, a drafting of a contract or doing a transaction. So to give you a simple example, let's take an example of a acquisition transaction where one company is acquiring another company. There's another company which is getting acquired is called the target company, right? And you basically, a job of the corporate lawyer is basically to represent its client to. So if you're representing an acquirer, then you will do a due diligence on the target, draft the documentation, which will be a share purchase agreement, and basically, thrash out the reps and warranties, so that if there is a problem with the company in future, then you can claim an indemnity. So for example, if the value of the company that you're assigning is $500 million today, and there is a claim of $100 million later, right? So that's going out of your pocket from the acquirer's pocket. So your job is, as a corporate lawyer, is to make sure that first of all the due diligence is proper, and if there is something which has not been disclosed by the target company, you have covered your client for that undisclosed liability, right? So and again, sometimes the acquirer really wants the deal to happen, and because of the reps and warranties or indemnity negotiation, the deal goes long, and your client comes and tells you, see, look, I don't want indemnity, and we'll tell them, listen, actually, you will need indemnity. So, and then they'll call us back that, let's drop it. So then that is where Sawmill comes in. I tell the client that let us, uh, have a call or have a chat with the general counsel. And if he says okay, or if she says okay, that you do not need indemnity, I'll be fine. And the client would will invariably say that, okay, I think that's fine, but not too many reps, not more than 5 pages, right? So, this is what goes in the background. And then what basically happens is, so here we also have to balance the interest of both parties, because if one party gets a fabulous deal, then the deal will end up in litigation few months or few years later, right? And that is when a role of a litigation lawyer comes in, when basically the contract is broken by one party. Then the person who has drafted the contract, more often than not, will go and brief the litigation counsel that this was the intent of the parties when we were drafting this contract, or for example, the target company did not disclose to us that there was a tax liability line in its books, but they never told us. They did not show us the tax notice. So now we want to claim for the reps and the indemnity for the reps representation that they gave us, that there was no tax liability on us. And then you go for arbitration if there is an arbitration clause in your document, or to the courts. So in a simple manner, this is what the role of the litigation lawyer is, the corporate lawyer is, to draft the contract, to balance the interests of the both parties, to take care of the requirements of the client, and make sure that there is a commercially viable deal that has gone through.
Thank you, Abhishek. I think that you explained it beautifully as to when and where the different phases of a corporate lawyer come in, and their roles and responsibilities. And that actually brings me to a very interesting thought that there could be chances that foreign firms are allowed to open spaces in India. So, the Professor Vikramaditya, what do you think that could bring in terms of opportunities for Indian corporate practices? And how should a student then determine whether they want to pursue something of those sorts, because you'll have a cross border of transactions happening, and how important it is for a student then to understand different jurisdictions and understand the laws of different jurisdictions, because there could be an overlap of such sort of a thing. So how do you see that happening in the near future?
So I think as a general matter, it's if you're interested in corporate or transactional or business practice, it's a good idea to get more familiar with international or global legal rules, because that's going to be important, given that most big deals these days do involve some kind of global component, or at least something that requires you to be more familiar with things than just what you've necessarily learned in law school or domestically. More broadly, though, on the issue of foreign law firms, it just increases the set of options that people have to choose from. So if you're an Indian corporate, you have more law firms that you might choose from, and more access to law firms that might be useful for specific countries' expertise. If you're an Indian lawyer, it gives you more opportunities for where you might get experience and get work, as well as where you may decide to settle. I've always sort of thought that for the high level of talent we have in Indian legal practice, it's a good idea for many people to be thinking about the global space. That sort of talent is valued all over the world. We see that in a lot of big companies these days that are being sort of helmed by people of Indian origin. And we're beginning to see that even in law, and I anticipate that that would continue to grow. So getting that kind of exposure is bound to be helpful, I would think. But even more generally, if you are planning to do corporate transactional work, it's a very good idea to get familiar with the global issues because you're likely to be facing those, maybe not in your first year, but as you progress through the field, almost certainly.
Thank you, Professor. So we'll take one last question and we'll quickly move to the Q&A because we've been flooded with a lot of questions and I would wish that the panel addresses those questions. So the last question is to Professor Dr. Anant. Professor, Professor Vikramaditya was mentioning that the student needs to know about different jurisdictional laws to have some sort of an edge over the practicing lawyers. What do you think in terms of technology and say the introduction of AI, is it really shaping the legal profession maybe in India, or do you have certain examples where you can share with the audience that how technology integration has actually helped in making legal decisions on forming legal decisions in a better way?
Right. I think there are two different aspects to this, right? One is the necessity perforce of engaging with comparative norms, and technology, in much the same way as international commercial transactions, has in fact made this all the more necessary and important. To give you a very good example, data protection. The foundational norms are very Eurocentric in some sense. I mean, the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, really changed the rules of the game because, in some sense, it is territorially bound, but data is not, as we all know, right? So if you're engaging with the data of European citizens, which I suspect a good number of the Indian IT-enabled service sector companies do, you have to be GDPR compliant. Now, what does that mean for a particular jurisdiction? Are you a data adequate nation? Those are, questions of detail. But the fact of the matter is that whether you are in a technology, media, telecom practice in an Indian law firm, or you are advising, European clients, you necessarily have to just engage with GDPR. Now, what is also happening in parallel is that we are talking about creating these norms globally. Each jurisdiction is engaging with this conundrum, right? How do you, in a big data age, protect data? Now you have GDPR. You need to customize GDPR. So in many ways, what we are seeing, at least in the Indian context, is that the Personal Data Protection Bill, which is now pending before the Joint Select Committee, about 70% of the bill is really deriving from these norms, which are established through GDPR. There is, of course, a customization that's happening too. But if you really want to be a good data protection lawyer in India, I assume you will have to really understand these foundational principles of data protection, a lot of which comes from OECD and GDPR. So I think there is really that element of, all of us are going through the same pain, right? And we are all trying to address it in some measure or the other, but some have taken the lead. So let's learn from those who have taken the lead and let's bring these norms. So perforce you have to engage with these comparative norms, especially in areas like data, where at least the way the world is at this point in time, there is largely free flow of data that we are talking about, right? So, and I don't think that's going to substantially change as much as we talk about data localization and all of that. The other part of this is, of course, integrating technology into regulatory norms, right? And none better than Lawrence Lessig when he said that, the internet in many ways is governed by 4 different things, of which the code is going to, in many ways, govern this in a much larger, outsized manner as compared to the written law. And we are seeing again this trend towards, code being a huge regulatory force, right? I mean, whether it's drone regulations in India, where you're talking about digital sky, which can look at, designing the drone in such a manner that it does not fly out of the, fly into the no-fly zone. And the code is basically a tool for regulation. Now, what happens typically in such cases is that regulators across the world have to speak. I mean, there is no other way than to regulate technology through this conversation. And best practices that come in, and the code will become a significant part of best practices, be it cryptocurrencies, be it artificial intelligence and data mining, or be it drone technology. So I think in all these different ways, the comparative exchange of ideas, the need for a comparative understanding of legal norms, of policy norms, and even regulatory norms dictated through technical architecture, all of this is really up for grabs, and I think really needed for all lawyers today to receive training in.
Definitely, Dr. Anand, especially when we talk about the GDPR's influence in not just in India, I think so many other jurisdictions, there's been a long-term impact in terms of them embracing and changing their current policies regarding data protection. And that's where, Professor Vikramaditya also mentioned that a student needs to know about the basics of certain principles. So when we talk about data protection, you need to know the basic principles of data protection and then go ahead and create policies and regulations around it. So thank you for that. I'll quickly move on to the Q&A because students are really flooded with a lot of questions and we would want to address them. So the first one is by Aryan Sharma. He asked that, dear panelists, as we today see the situation that happened in the engineering field, do you see this happening in the field of law in the near future? So just a little bit of background that, there was a big hype of students taking up engineering as a course. And the student is probably concerned that would a similar situation happen in the law field, and probably wants to know whether, there'll be less opportunities when it comes to a student who takes up law as a profession. So Professor Vikramaditya, you could probably address that.
Sure, good question. My sense is that that will not necessarily happen with the legal profession. In part because, of course, the provision of corporate lawyers in India is so small relative to the economy that the scale of growth needed to get saturated would be massive. And there just simply isn't that number of students graduating each year into the corporate law space. So I don't anticipate that happening anytime soon. Also, it's worth noting that in the US, people have always been asking when will the demise of corporate law occur. I've been hearing that question since I was 15. And 15 was a very long time ago for me. So it's not something I worry about too much. If anything, corporate lawyers have continued to be in high demand, and their demand has continued to grow, I would say, in spite of the fact that more and more people are entering the space.
Thank you, Vikramaditya, for that. The next question is by Nitika Sangwan. She has specifically asked this to Abhishek. She would want to know, how did you figure out to become what you wanted to become today, an M&A expert? What keeps an M&A lawyer driven and motivated? And finally, what can a law student do to themselves in terms of starting their career as an M&A lawyer, especially in a tier 1 firm?
Yeah, so basically, fortunately for me, I was clear in my third year that I would want to go for corporate law and not for litigation. I would not practice in the chambers. I would go and practice in a law firm. And I graduated in 2008. And I joined a corporate law firm. I fortunately got through one of the niche M&A corporate law firms. I joined them and there was no work because of the great financial crisis. Right. So in the first year, for the first 18 months, all I did was litigation. And I've been to Chennai High Court several times. And then I had the opportunity to move back into corporate because the corporate work started to pick up. And that is how I got back into corporate law. But the experience that I had in litigation helped me a long way in understanding how courts work, how litigation helps corporate lawyers. So, for example, I'll give you a small example of a lot of times litigation and legal notices are used to get people to table and discuss and find solutions. So, for example, if there is a dispute between two parties, they're not talking, they're exchanging, or there is a deadlock kind of a scenario. For example, in a joint venture, there are two partners, they're not talking, and one wants to go this way, the other that way. So as a corporate lawyer, you try to bring them, bring some, midway solution. But if that does not happen, then you go for the kill, which is basically then you go for litigation. And that is when a lot of times what I have felt is that my experience, that 1 or 18 months experience that I had in litigation, comes in handy, because a lot of disputes got resolved without actually going to courts. So, so basically, what I think is that to answer Nritika Sangwan's question, that fortunately for me, I was clear in my third year that I wanted to go for corporate law. You can also, intern and figure out the good way of doing it is to intern. And I actually went across India to intern. I did not intern at one place repeatedly, because that was one of the last opportunities probably to see the country and work with various places, because I interned in Coca-Cola in Chennai, and in Mumbai I've interned in Delhi and Gurgaon, and in Jaipur and Jodhpur. So it gave me a flavor of all the places, and I could select where I wanted to be. For example, Chennai, Mumbai, Bangalore, and Delhi are completely different when it comes to work culture. They have their own different flavors. Bangalore is a startup hub. Gurgaon is becoming a startup hub. Chennai has been, at one of the greatest high courts in country is in Chennai, and the oldest. And Bombay is, of course, has the largest corporate houses. So if you get an opportunity, try to intern as many places as you can. But if you just actually don't need to follow what I did, because sometimes it is actually smart to intern at a place repeatedly to secure a job. So once you have a job, or once you have figured what you want to do, then you can experiment. But you can see what works for you and go about it on that path.
Thank you, Abhishek, for that. So I'll be just clubbing a few questions which are pretty repetitive, and probably the panelists would want to address those. Number one is what is a better choice in terms of a course, whether it's a BCom LLB or a BBA LLB or a BA LLB, and would a LLM, say, in an international corporate law, be any sort of beneficial for a student who wants to practice again in a law firm? So Professor Dr. Anant, you could probably address this, and even Saumil, you could take it up in terms of the different courses and what are the differences there.
So I personally think that the 5-year model is an interesting one. It's very experimental, and honestly, it really depends on what kind of direction you want to kind of give to your career, right? And at 18, it's very difficult to make these choices. So I am actually a huge fan of the 3-year model if it's done well. So I know that doesn't really answer the question, but I think at 18, it's very difficult to make this choice of an interdisciplinary education as laid out by the vision of the National Law School, the different schools, and the kind of programs that they have created. I can speak a little bit about what I see as the merits of each, and then finally each person can decide for herself what works. For instance, I think the BA LLB honors program, if done well, gives you a very good grounding in liberal studies, and that liberal education which helps you think very critically. So that grounding as a critical thinker is, I think, built most in the BA LLB honors model. What a BSc LLB honors can really do for you is to open up some of these very technical areas, like, for instance, IPR, where that grounding in science can definitely help. Not that if you do BA LLB, that's difficult or impossible. It's just that, having that science background, especially for patent law, might have, might help you, right? So there are some merits to that. The BCom, again, I think for those who are doing corporate law, there are definitely advantages in being comfortable with finance, accounting. I mean, I'm seeing that with our students. I mean, within the cohort of the Ksha Fellowship, those who have done the BCom, LLB, fine, finance, accounting, numbers more generally, more comfortable handling, while those who are coming from the BA, LLB stream, even from the best of colleges, the moment you put numbers, they are very uncomfortable with it. You know, so while there is an economics course and all that, I think there are huge challenges there, you know, with that model, right? So I think these are some of the varying, you know, strengths and so on of each of these integrated programs. But I personally would also urge, if in this crowd there are students who are thinking of a good program, a good BCom program, a good BA economics program, please go ahead and do it, and then come back to doing law after 3 years. And there are some very good 3-year programs too in the country. They give you a very different orientation to life and work and all of that. On the point about the LLM program, I think, you know, if you are interested in doing corporate law, the US is an amazing destination. I was at Penn. I did not pursue corporate law. I was doing a very different track, but I saw the faculty there, and of course, none better than Dr. Khanna here, who can speak more to this. I mean, the way that, you know, the US thinks about corporate law, you know, weaving in that whole policy, regulatory aspects, the economic understanding, all of that, right? It's simply mind blowing. I don't think we have even scratched the surface in India when it comes to teaching corporate law from this perspective. And I mean, even the conversations that I had with people in my cohort, it really changed my thinking about how law works within a larger, you know, business and economic setting. And I definitely would recommend a good program in the US to understand this element well.
Thank you, Dr. Anand, on this. Before I move to Saumil, I would just want Professor Vikramaditya to just address this question regarding, foreign law schools and foreign degrees. Especially, there are a lot of Indian students who aspire to study in the US. You know, what kind of suggestions would you give to that particular law aspirant?
So I agree with Dr. Padmanabhan that doing an LLM, especially in the corporate law space, but even more generally, can be very enhancing to your knowledge base and your experience base in practicing and just more generally in being a lawyer. The types of things that I think are good to be doing, of course, is doing well in your law studies, but also looking for opportunities where you can get the kind of experience and exposure that would be helpful to you in thinking about whether you want to pursue corporate law. That could be at a law firm or in-house or even in a regulatory capacity, especially the policy side. Because as Dr. Padmanabhan mentioned, I think a lot of places in the world are now doing a lot of rethinking in the policy side with respect to corporate law issues, which makes it, again, an exciting and energetic space to be in. While it's still, you know, things have to get done on a regular basis. You have to get M&A deals done. You have to worry about bankruptcy. There are many things that are happening at the same time. So staying plugged in, I think is very helpful in that regard, and keeping abreast of the knowledge base that seems to be developing at its own remarkable speed.
Thank you, Professor. So over to you, Saumil, in terms of different type of law courses, law schools offer today, whether it's BCom, BBA, BA law, LLB degree. What is your take on it in terms, especially entering as a corporate lawyer or a litigator? Do you think there is any difference as such at the end of the day, or what are the different enhancements these particular courses give to a particular student?
Right, that's a very good question, but Anand sir has already covered all each and every part of it. But for a better understanding, I would just like to point out that if you want to go into litigation or prepare for judicial services, then you should pursue you should go for BA LLB. But if you are more into corporate side, if you want to get into a corporate firm, or if you want to get as an in-house counsel in a company, then you should go for BBA LLB. But the major issue here is that while deciding this course, when you have just passed +2, it becomes very difficult for a law aspirant to understand at that point of time that where he will end up, either in a corporate firm or he will be doing a litigation. So at that point of time, they may not be able to understand their area of interest. And that is why internships are very important. And when you are in the third year of your law school, or say in the seventh sem, by that time you have a better clarity in mind as to what is your area of interest is. As Abhishek sir also pointed out, that by the third year of his law school, he understood where his interest lies. So, and then secondly, nowadays, many of the universities, including Alliance University, after third year of the law school, we have an opportunity to choose an honor subject. That is why our courses are termed as BA LLB honors and BBA LLB honors. So even if you have chosen BA LLB, and you can always take a subject in the company law side. You can always take capital markets, corporate law, business laws as your honors, as your specialization subject. And even if you have even if you are pursuing BA LLB, you can enter into corporate side. It's not that if you are only into BB LLB, then only you can get into a corporate firm or an in-house counsel in a company. That particular thing, if by choosing your honors subject in the third year or in the fourth year of your law school, even if you are pursuing BA LLB, you can get into the business side as well, and same applies vice versa as well.
Thank you so much. I think Abhishek, you had something to add to this.
Yeah, so basically, I agree with Samuel, Anant, and Vic that, so for corporate law, it is basically BCom or BBLLB, and for many others, it could be a BALLB course. But, again, Samuel pointed out that students are not sure when they're in the first year of college, and even before entering the college, they have to choose. So I would just tell you that, in all three courses, you're going to get the LLB degree. That is what matters the most. So have a childlike approach. If you if you show a balloon and a book to the child, as a child, you would always would have gone for the balloon. So there is an LLB there. Don't worry too much about it. As we grow up, there are more choices which confuse us. So don't stray from your path. There is an LLB degree attached to it. Just go for it, whichever one you like.
Thank you, Abhishek. Apologies, I think we're a little running out of time, so Professor Vikramaditya had to leave, but we can just have a couple of few questions before we close the session. This is specifically directed to Abhishek again, because, and even Saumil could, pitch in here. A lot of students are concerned about the big pay package, law firms offer, and that is something that is really attractive to them. Do you think that is some sort of decision-making factor when a student opts or chooses law as a career? Do you think a big pay salary package is very important at the starting of a student's career, or that could be seen as a secondary option?
Yeah, so what I think is that what is going to matter in the long run is your domain expertise. So even if you start with a good pay package, but you do not have the domain expertise, then that big pay package would vanish away soon enough, right? And you know it. You have known it all through your school life, and if you are in college, you know it now, right? So basically, it is all about gaining as much knowledge, learning as much knowledge that you can take. When you are at internships, if you're interning in the Supreme Court, there is no work during the day. You can just go and sit in chambers or in the courtrooms, and several students gain knowledge from there. Similarly, you can, as I said, read orders in your spare time and try to develop that deep knowledge or competency, and that is what is going to sail you through the profession. So you shouldn't be worried about pay packages at all. So I'll give you an example from my personal experience. So there was a junior in my college who was really, really good. So we went for Jessups and we opted for him as a researcher, and he did a wonderful job. And I got a job in a corporate law firm. And when he graduated in 2009, it was the worst time to get out of college. And he could not land a job that he could have got otherwise, because he was really competent. But because of his work, and every time that we worked with him, he had delivered, I recommended his name 2 years later to my partner when I got an opportunity that our firm is going to recruit. So even though he would have started at 20K he got the deserved recognition as well as pay package that you're talking about 2 years later. So, and in the long run now, if I look back and see, and if he looks back and sees that in the long run, it is basically the hard work, determination that you have that matters the most, and the willingness to work. So and if you have the domain expertise, money will follow you. You have heard it so many times, you're hearing it again, right? That's the simple way of putting it.
Thank you, Abhishek. Saumil, would you want to address that as well, because you
Yes.
just freshly started your journey? So,
Yes.
do you think that has ever tainted your decision in terms of taking up corporate law or litigation?
Ideally, what I think is that it should not be taken into consideration while choosing a career in law, because even now recently, I think last week, Bar Council of India, they have filed an application before the Supreme Court of India favoring 3 years of advocate experience for judicial service exam. So we think that once we join the judiciary, the life is set and we have a nice pay package. But then Bar Council wants 3 years of experience before joining the judicial service. So there comes the importance of, as Abhishek sir pointed out, about the domain expertise and the practical exposure and the practical learning aspect of it. So, like traditionally, there was a concept that if you are into litigation, then you won't get more than 10, 12K. But even now, certain law firms, they have I think certain law firms, they have a dispute management cell also, wherein you can appear before the court and argue before the court of law. So the purpose of litigation as well as working in a law firm, both are served equally. So it's not that the pay package should affect a decision of a law student, because at the end of the day, what matters is the practical learning and the domain expertise.
Thank you, Saumil, for that. I would actually like to thank the panelists again. I know we're running a little short of time, but before we close, I would want each of the panelists to give a quick 10-second remark in terms of why should a law aspirant take up law as a career, and what are the future prospects for the law student in today's age, and especially talking about the globalization and effect of the pandemic, which is occurred in terms of changing the whole legal scenario. So, Dr. Anand, I would like you to go first.
Thanks, Afreen. I think it's just that it's such an exciting profession, right? I mean, things keep changing. There are new transitions. So if you choose right, I think, if you choose the right domain, and I must thank Abhishek for pointing that out, the value of domain expertise, right? If you are in the right domain, I think, it's a journey of lifelong learning, and what better reward than that life can offer you.
Thank you, Dr. Anand. Abhishek?
Yeah, so one final advice or my parting remarks to all the law students and law aspirants and the audience would be to basically, as I said, you need to have that relentless training. And today we live in the age of social media. So I really think that everyone, including me, should declutter. There has to be a time and space so that we are not continuously scrolling through our smartphones. There has to be a specific time and diligence given to attain that knowledge that we want to achieve. And one very important thing that has worked for me and that has worked for several people in the world who, on the basis of books that I've read, what I realize is that you need to have a mentor. So, coaching under, so there is a self-taught individual, and then there is a person who is well coached. So very few self-taught individuals have excelled, but people who have put in those 10,000 hours that Malcolm Gladwell had propounded under specialized coaching of a mentor, that is what is going to give you great results. So one example is of Gopi Chand, that from his badminton academy, the kind of athletes we have never seen before. Why? Because he is a great mentor. So these people put in those hard working hours, but not without a specialized or a very serious mentor. So try to find that mentor during your internships in your college or wherever you can, and make that connect and keep learning as you progress.
Thank you for that kind words, Abhishek. Somil?
Yes, just to add one thing, the legal profession is the only profession where what we learn in the 5 years of our law school, we need to apply those things while working. Be you are working in a corporate sector, be you are doing a litigation, or you are working as an in-house counsel in a MNC or in a company. Your practical learning, which you have learned in the 5 years of the law school, or you have learned through moot courts, you have learned through internships, those same thing you have to apply while working in a professional life as well. So I think this is the only career where this thing is applicable.
Thank you, Somal, for those words. So, as closing remarks, I would like to say that at LSEC Global, we are driven by the goal to expand, diversify, and strengthen the legal system here in India. And because of this firm belief, LSAC makes resources available to law aspirants and promote broad-based diversity in legal education across legal profession. I believe that today the legal profession needs lawyers who look like you or think like you and bring that sort of a value and uniqueness in this experience. So to this, I would like to just highlight a few things that the registrations for the LSAT India 2021 are open now. And we have some sort of an early bird registration, which is only valid till 15 January 2021. So I request all the audience members to quickly avail that particular offer. There are also scholarship opportunities that LSAC Global is offering. One is specifically given to the LSAT India topper. And the other one is dealing with the Access to Justice scholarship, which is based on an essay writing competition. Both these scholarships are for value of 4 lakh rupees each. So you're somebody who wants to pursue their career in law, would want to study in a good law school and want some sort of an assistance. We at LSAC do provide those assistance to students to make sure that your dream to become a lawyer comes true. I also invite the audience to contact us in terms of they want to host certain sessions at their schools, or parents for certain open houses if they're willing to do conduct these sessions for families. We just would want that at least there should be more than 20 registrant people who would like us to do these counseling sessions for schools or for a particular parental group. I once again thank the panelists for taking out time today from their busy schedules to motivate law aspirants today. I also thank the audience members for their active participation and the LSAC team for the successful conduct of the webinar. See you all soon for our next webinar series. Till then, stay safe and stay healthy. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Afreen. Thank you, LSAC Global.
Thank you.